further ado, class number 4, take it away, Quinton.
Great, thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody. So wonderful to see everyone on night 4. Tonight, very much going to be about some practical tools and so forth, tools for transformation. But before we get there, we're going to do a little homework review from last week. The thing I set you on last week was to reflect on a moment of stress or suffering and think about how that might have been transformed over time into something that might have been positive for you, and to think about what those steps were. Probably more than one step. And is that a pattern in your life? So there were some things to consider from last week. So if anybody, did that bring anything up for anybody? Anybody think about that and reflect on that? Okay, so let's, go, Karen. You rocked last week. I got high expectations.
Oh no. Well, I think this is an important share. I won't say what the issue was because we'd be here all night, but
yes.
But it was a big, major struggle, and it was for about a decade or so. And I met this guy named Tom. No.
Yes. Tom's having a rough night here tonight.
No, actually, his name was Quinton, and he really carved a path, carved a way for me and for many. And he led me to Dallas Willard's work. And some of the steps I took were creating a vision for my future and matching that vision with a really strong intention and stepping into a new way of being. So the old way of being wasn't serving me anymore. And I was repeating the same thing every day, expecting my future to change. So when I created that strong vision and stepped into it, it was hard work. And through repetition, daily repetition of certain things, I eventually was guided towards another program, a big program some of you know about. And it was a reinforcement of this work. And through repetition and God's grace, I am now living my vision. And it's absolutely amazing. And I'm just absolutely so grateful. But I think the words to hear are vision, intention. The means definitely showed up. Stepping into a new way of being. So different thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. And gratitude. And I think, yeah, those are the words. So I'm so grateful to you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. I'm not really going to open that up too much tonight, but I do want to touch on it briefly since she brought it up. So Dallas had a very simple kind of method called the VIM method, vision, intention, and means. And so I'm going to go over that quickly right here at the top. But obviously I could teach on this till the day I die because it's an extraordinary way to go forward. Vision is, you have a vision about the kind of life you would like to live. You articulate that for yourself. This is what I want. I want this kind of a life. Now, that's 100% up to you. That's your articulation about what the good life looks like for you. So that takes a little bit of reflection. You got to figure that piece out for yourself. And again, as we've been discussing here, there's no right or wrong about that. Try not to go, oh, I'm getting a gold star in the vision piece. Or I don't think I'm doing this well. It's just you. It's what you think of the good life. Second piece is intention. That's the I in them. That's when you go public with this vision. You start to talk to everybody that you know, and you say, I intend to live that kind of life. So why would we do that? Because accountability is important. Being accountable to people matters. And they will help you if you ask them to hold you accountable for that vision. All right. The third piece is means. That is you being open to what God then pushes onto the table for you to achieve that vision. Those means often come from strange and unusual and unpredictable places, but your heart has to be open to what that might be. It may not look the way you wanted it to look. Often it is not, but you have to maintain an open heart and an open dialogue with God about what those means are. So that is a pattern for whole life transformation that you can take into your job, you can take into your relationship, you can take into a lot of different places. And it really, really, really gives you some practical rails upon which to put the train in your life and achieve some transformation. So I love it. I got 1,000 stories just like Karen's that are really built around Vim. And so there's that. Okay, so tonight, I'm going to give you some other tools. It's a process or a series of spiritual practices that you can engage in when you're feeling overwhelmed, stressed, or unsafe. Again, this is a process. There is no winning. You don't win this. You don't get a gold star, and you don't actually ever finish. These are tools that you use in the process of becoming. I'm not a fan of spiritual technology, meaning if you pray these 3 things, then it's all going to work out. It's one of the reasons I'm an Episcopalian, not a Roman Catholic. I believe, as I stated before, that this is a relationship. It's a unique interaction between you and God. So each one of the things I'm going to lay out tonight should be approached by you as an experiment in relationship. You should try them out and find out if they work for you. And if not, no harm, no foul. It just didn't work for you. Your relationship needs something different. Use what works and throw away the rest. You can experiment. You're going to have an experience, and you can eliminate what doesn't work. But if you don't try it, you won't know whether it works or not. I'm going to emphasize that you need to experiment. You need to experience. That's where knowledge comes from, and that's what you want. So here comes tonight's definition for clarity's sake. We have knowledge when we can represent something as it actually is based on appropriate thought and experience. Emphasis on that last word, experience. Knowledge is not the same as education. I can educate myself about car repair, read a lot of books, watch a video on YouTube or whatever, but until I pick up the tools to change out a carburetor myself, I cannot claim to have knowledge about car repair. I have some education, but I do not have knowledge. In spiritual matters, this is very important because a lot of leaders are educated without having knowledge. The point of Renovari, where I was trained, was the emphasis on knowledge, an interactive experience. Yes, there were books to read, but you had to engage in your own life in real time, a series of practices that were meant to transform your character into Christ-likeness. It's a process that is never finished. So it becomes a lifestyle. Tonight, I'm going to be laying out some tools as they apply to stress and anxiety, but many of these tools can be directed to whole life transformation. If you're interested in that, I would encourage you to continue to hang around St. Patrick's because I know George and the leadership here know what I am talking about. So, on to the tools. We're going to be using COVID as our example because obviously everyone has to deal with it. And it's easy to understand how that would be anxiety provoking and make us all feel unsafe. But it's just representative of any challenge you might be facing that's destabilizing. Your boss at work, your spouse, whatever. I recently had glaucoma surgery, and let me tell you, when they said they were going to shoot a laser into my eye and everything was going to be okay, I was a little suspicious. So these tools were things that I needed. The first part of the process is what we've already been doing in this class. We've been practicing something very important. We've been practicing the art of becoming. By committing to this class, you affirmed, whether you're conscious of it or not, that you are interested in becoming something different than what you are. And this is at the heart of spiritual formation. Spiritual formation is always happening. You have a spirit. It is constantly responding and activating around the life you are living. It is being formed and reformed every day. A commitment to spiritual formation means you are placing that formation at the center of your life instead of just letting life have its way with you. What God gets out of your life is the person you are becoming. Most of us who are parents can talk vividly about the joy we experience when we see or hear about our children doing something nice for someone else and making the right choice in a difficult situation. That joy is in the knowledge that something we produced is now producing good. There's no other feeling like it, and it's what God feels about you as you become that love-spreading difference maker you were made to be. But here's what's frustrating. It's not a straight line. Who am I becoming while I wait? I'm going to let you read that quote from Henry Nouwen. To wait with openness and trust is an enormously radical attitude towards life. It is giving up control over our future and letting God define our life. An enormously radical attitude. Because most of the things that are truly challenging ask us to wait. Wait for the test results, wait for the mask mandate to be lifted, wait for the bank to call, wait for the resume to be reviewed, wait, wait, wait. So who am I becoming while I wait? Can I be in charge of that? Of course you can. How can I be in charge of who I am becoming? Well, you can start with this. You must arrange your life so that you are experiencing deep contentment, joy, and confidence in your everyday life with God. That phrase was given to me by Dallas Willard, and I have it written on a card. I brought it that Sunday that I preached, and it embarrassed me so badly because it's been sitting on my bedside table for so many years that I hadn't really looked at it seriously until I brought it here and realized that there were coffee stains on it. I think a bug got squished. It was horrible. But I do gaze on it every day and night. And it's a constant reminder for me to arrange my life correctly. I am in charge of how my life gets arranged. That is a significant responsibility in who I become. So, while you wait, how can you arrange your life so that you are spending more time in God's kingdom and not the kingdom of the world? Instead of letting your mind be occupied by COVID restrictions or whatever, how can you arrange it for it to be occupied by the experience of a good and loving God? Remember what I said when we were discussing thoughts and feelings? Where we choose to put our thoughts largely controls how we feel about our lives. This isn't an admonition to ignore COVID or anything else, but to interrogate our response to it. How might my interaction with COVID restrictions be turned into something good? How would Jesus go about getting vaccinated? Not what would Jesus do, because sometimes I think that's too esoteric. I prefer how. The actual way in which something would get done. Interrogating that action and making it my own is the best course of apprenticeship I can follow. I have to do it in the spirit I think he would do it if he were me. So, this is the definition of discipleship to Jesus or apprenticeship to Jesus. I am learning from him how to live my life as if he were me. Which means, if I'm going to get a COVID shot, if I am going to file my income taxes, if I am going to pick up my child from school, what is the spirit of Jesus? How would he be doing that thing? I am learning from him how to do that thing. When you start to think of yourself in that position, you become an apprentice in the school of Jesus. Now, if you are confused or you don't know how Jesus might go and do that particular thing, that's what you have a Bible for. And as I said on the Sunday that I preached, if you really start to dig into the Gospels, you will very quickly find that Jesus faced a version of something similar to what you are going to face. Bureaucracy, governments, family betrayals, friends who aren't who they say they're going to be, on and on and on. Then what you would want to do would be to then look at the spirit of his interaction with those people and that situation. And then as best you can, try and take that attitude into whatever that interaction happens to be. And then watch what happens. That is the school of Jesus. That is how you are an apprentice. I know that discipleship is a really weird, creepy church word. I wish it weren't. That's why we try and use apprentice, because if you understand apprenticeship, then you put yourself in better relationship. The apprentice is never meant to make a perfect table or a perfect horseshoe or anything like that. You are just in a position of learning from a master. You are in the master's workshop. You come here every day. If you are an apprentice, you don't get a grade. You just work on your table. You work on your horseshoes. You make whatever it happens to be. And then tomorrow you come back and you learn a different lesson. That's what apprenticeship is. It requires you to show up in the workshop every day prepared to learn. And some days you do, and some days your table has 3 legs. You know what I mean? Like you come back tomorrow and think, well, maybe I'll figure out that 4th leg, I hope. Or maybe I go do a chair now because the table thing didn't work. But that keeps you in right relationship. I'm doing the best that I can. This is where I am. I'm trying to learn from the Master the way the Master does it. So now I get a vaccination as if I were Jesus. What will my attitude be? How will I interact with the healthcare professional I have to deal with? Think about that for a minute. All those things are now transformed, and my mind is in a completely different place than what it would have been otherwise. I have arranged my life in such a way that grace can flow. And remember, grace is God doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. So after I've been through that, hopefully experiencing some grace, I will also arrange to reflect on what happened. This is where confidence comes from, as I was talking to Cindy about earlier. And we've been practicing this together in this class already. I've asked you to use this prayer of examine over and over. Each night, you've begun to make a habit of interacting with God over things that I have assigned. So, in the example we've been using, on the evening of your COVID vaccination, you might ask, God, where were you in the middle of all of that? Now, the bottom one there is the one I use every single night. Before I go to sleep, I pray, God, where did you come to me today disguised as my ordinary life? And as you reflect on that, you may find that God was there, but that you blew right past her. But even if you did, what you will begin to get is the confidence that Dallas references. God was there. I missed it because I was distracted. But God was there. Now that I'm taking a moment to reflect, I see God's presence in it. And that gives me confidence that God is actually in the middle of the thing, even when I don't recognize it at the moment. Because I don't like getting a shot. That nurse was rude. I lost my parking ticket, whatever it happens to be. Does not mean God wasn't present and soaking me in grace in that moment. I don't have to recognize it. One of my favorite phrases is the kingdom of God is always in session, whether you like it or not. You don't have to acknowledge it in order for it to work. But reflection, this prayer of examine, gives you another opportunity to drop back in quiet and go, oh, sorry I missed you, but you were there. Oh, that little moment, I kind of missed it, but now that I think about it, that was grace. Thank you. I'll try and do better next time, going back to workshop tomorrow, just like I was there today. In order to really learn from experience, we need to reflect on experience. People say we learn from history. That is unfortunately not true. We learn from reflecting on history. And based on reflection, maybe we want to change what we do next time. Oh, welcome back to Lent. The true purpose of Lent is to change your way of living for the better based on new information. This information comes to you during this period of reflection. That is a large part of the activity of Lent. And that process does not need to be limited to these 40 days. This process is sometimes called repentance. There's another scary church word. And it can be engaged at any point. As you engage in this constant state of becoming through engagement and reflection, you will begin to put together a narrative, your own story about how God is with you. In Renovare, we call it the with God life. And you have that story, and that story is true. And you need to know what it is. Once you can step back and look at it, you will begin to feel more secure in all situations. So here we are with the fourth tool. So now, the next tool is spiritual autobiography. That's your story. We've already begun this. You've already shared a bunch of it with me each and every week here. Cindy just shared some of hers. So did Karen last week and this week. You look at a stressful time, you assess the steps you took to get through it. That's your story, and that story is true. It's an illustration of God's activity and your collaboration with God in the shaping of your life. If you took a day simply to look over the entirety of your life, I think you would find it fascinating. So can you take a day and really reflect on it? Take a little personal retreat to write your spiritual autobiography? I would encourage you to do so, because you'll find out that God has been in a lot of places with you that you may not have been aware at that particular moment. The spiritual autobiography is also a confidence builder. A sense of security comes from it, a prevailing sense of well-being. That's the definition of joy. Joy is a prevailing sense of well-being. Confidence and joy. What about that third word that Dallas gave me? Contentment. Where will that come from in the age of COVID? Contentment is satisfaction with the way things actually are. And satisfaction is a tough word, my friends. I know that George has already done some teaching from Dallas's book, A Life Without Lack. And if you struggle with being discontented, I would direct you back to that. I don't have all the time necessary to open it up in this session, but I will quickly point out to you a couple of things. Comparison is the quickest route to insanity. Such a huge amount of our dissatisfaction in life comes from our constant game of comparison, usually with just a little tinge of envy. Why did they get that promotion? How come they got to buy a house and I didn't? And on and on and on, and it's exhausting. If you want relief from this comparison game and the dissatisfaction it brings, you're going to have to do something very serious. You will have to abandon the idea that you sit on the throne of your own life. I'm asking you right now to consider abdicating and allowing God to take that seat. What does the Bible mean when it says seek the kingdom first? Which it so often does. This is the death to self that Jesus talks about in multiple ways throughout his ministry. This self remains alive and on the throne of our lives as long as we take what happens to us as the ultimate point of reference. Meaning, our worldview uses our ego as its gravitational center. And if that's the case, then everything comes through that filter. the filter of, well, how does it make me feel? What does that got to do with me? I'm happy with that. I'm unhappy with that. Me, me, me. Contrast that with what Jesus recommends, and I do too, which is, what is God doing here? What do I think God's intentions are? How can I get involved in a way that pushes forward what I think God wants? And now here we are back again to the beginning of our time together, where the idea you have about God is the most important idea that you possess. Because now you're operating in a completely different way in the world. And now your satisfaction and your contentment comes from being a co-creator with God in this project that is called your life. It isn't all on you. It's a partnership, a relationship, and it doesn't live or die based on what you do. If it's a partnership with God, how often do you go to your partner and say, what do you want to do here? What are you interested in here? With whatever that situation might be. With your relationships, with your jobs, with your politics, with whether or not you should buy that car or rent that car. I mean, people laugh when I say those things, but I'm telling you, that's about marshaling resources and priorities and getting all of that straight. If you're trying to manage that on your own without going to God, going, I don't know what's better, buy this car or lease this car. People go, oh, that's dumb. Is it? I've been on a car lot. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of resources. You think you got that by yourself? You don't need to have a conversation with God and talk about provision? Having a conversation with God around provision, small provision, large provision, whatever that happens to be. Why do you want to carry the provision thing by yourself? Why? That's heavy. That's heavy. Am I going to have enough money to pay this month's rent, to pay that kid's tuition, to fix the roof of St. Patrick's? You want to carry that by yourself? I don't think you do. Why? Because when you share it with the creator of the universe, your part of that carry is a lot less. You're going to sleep better. You're going to feel more relaxed in the universe. But what you must do is go and talk to that partner. And that conversation, I mean, this is relational. It's like I said before, this is a relationship. That conversation often is not resolved in one go. It isn't. That doesn't work like that in my house, especially with things that are complicated. We talk for weeks and weeks and weeks, months, sometimes years about the biggest issues and what the right way forward is. So that's an ongoing conversation that sometimes sits unresolved. God will be very, very quiet in the hopes that you will come to the right decision on your own. Why? Because that shows us the person you are becoming. That is the formation of character. Your character is being formed in such a way that you can be trusted with what you are asking for. So these conversations can be long and they can be very complicated because that's what relationship is like. That's true partnership. True partnership You getting off the throne of your own life and putting God there and saying, what are we doing together, God? You're in charge here. Now, most of us will do that in a crisis. Try doing it when you go buy a car. Hopefully a car is not a crisis for you. I'm just using it as an example. But do that when it's not a crisis. Because you want to practice on the little things before the big things come. I've spent the last several days talking about Will Smith almost around the clock. Because people know that I am the person that I am, and that the formation of character and right behavior is at the center of spiritual formation and what I do, my phone and email started to ring off the hook. And most of my conversation has been around, you are not what you profess, you are what you do. And what you practice, sooner or later, somebody's going to witness. Sooner or later, somebody's going to witness. Very rarely in the human being does some action come out of nowhere. Mostly, you have been rehearsing things in your mind before the action takes place. Mostly. So in the Will Smith case, if you know anything about it, he had an ongoing beef with Chris Rock that extended back to last year and even further. So inside his mind, he had been rehearsing, one of these days, he's going to go too far and I'm going to do a thing. And then that day came. That's rehearsing offsite for the someday that is inevitable to come in most people's lives. So in our case, we want to be rehearsing offsite things like, God, do you think I should lease this car or buy this car? Because the stakes are very, very low there. So when the moment, the big moment comes, the high pressure moment, you are already in the habit of having conversations with God and making God the central focus of what you're doing. You recognize that voice when you hear it. You're in the habit of asking for God's grace. So that's why it's not ridiculous. It's not ridiculous to make God the partner in the smallest details of your life. Because someday, something big is going to become, something big is going to come, and you want to have been becoming that person who without thought says, God, what do I need to do here? And you get that moment, that whisper in your ear, and you make the right moment. People ask me all the time, why should I be interested in Christian spiritual formation? And I say, don't you want to be the person who does the right thing at the right time, every time? Well, there's a method to become that kind of person. And that's what we are becoming. That's what we are devoted to. That's, whether you know it or not, something moved you to come here tonight, to come for these past 4 weeks, and hopefully next week too. That's what we're doing. That's what you are meant for. To be that person that both in your heart and in your community, people can look at George and go, you know what that guy is? That guy's the right guy. He's the one who does the right thing at the right time every time. That's the story I want told about me after this is all done. And there is a method to get there. Jesus did not ask you to do this on your own and did not leave you with no instructions about how that could get done. There is no reason for you to wander through life and go, I don't know. I don't know how you become a good person. So, if you put God on the throne of your life, you're going to find out that the comparison game is completely irrelevant. That what God is providing for you is sufficient. It's not going to happen immediately. But over time, that comparison game will start to feel ridiculous. Because with God as the source of your provision, your partner in all things, you will find that you are content with what you have. You will be involved with the creator of all things, the source of all good. And what else is there, really? And here's another admonition from Dallas, which is if you are still discontented, you need to check your wanter. Why do you want what you want? Is a really insightful question. Especially if there is something lodged in your life that you can't get moved. You should attack it with, why do I want that? Why is that so important to me? And look out, because here comes pride. And here comes ego, and here comes a lot of things that you may not like about yourself. But more often than not, if you check your wanter, you'll find a way to dislodge that rock. Now, there are three things that must be working within us before we can feel the sufficiency that I'm talking about. And here they are. Trust. Number one, sooner or later, you're going to have to trust God or none of this is going to work. 2, death to self, which we just talked about. You're going to have to sacrifice the idea that your wants, needs, and desires are the center of the universe. And 3, you're going to need some love, which is actively working for and hoping for the good of the other, will take you right out of that self-centered, worry-filled life that you have been suffering under. I'm going to stop here again to underline that. Love in the Christian sense, in the Jesus sense, is not affection. It is not a feeling of affection. Love in the way that Jesus used it is to actively work for and hope for the good of the other. You can do that with people you dislike. That is the only way to make sense of Jesus' use of the word love in the Gospels. In that sense, love your enemies is something you can actually do. He's not saying feel affection for your enemies, because you can't do that. That's impossible. If you have tried it, you know what I'm talking about. But you can actively work for and hope for their good. That's something you can do. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. being the primary example. Gandhi being a primary example. Those were men who loved their enemies and actively worked for the good of those people that opposed them. Now, when trust in God, death to self, and love are alive in you, you will find that hope and joy pervade your entire life as a natural result. So, recapping the tools presented for you tonight. Number 1, admit that you are in the midst of becoming. No one is an expert in the art of becoming. It's a process. Just commit to the process. And stop keeping score. Number 2, arrange your life so that you are experiencing deep contentment, joy, and confidence in your everyday life with God. How you go about doing that is very personal and very specific to you. Take some time to figure it out for yourself. 3, reflection should lead you to spiritual autobiography. Remember, knowing where God showed up for you in the past makes it easier to have confidence in her showing up this time too. 4 is that good old spiritual autobiography. Your story is true. Do you know what your story is? If you don't, you should take some time to write it down. And 5, practice keeping the kingdom. Practice seeking the kingdom first. And here's a way you could do that. I believe in something that is called the beloved community. I believe I'm there tonight. The beloved community cannot exist without you. It is a social function. As you look around this room, these are your partners in the beloved community that is St. Patrick's. This group of people here that we have been together now for a month is so important to my life. I could not and would not be the person I am today without the beloved community of St. Patrick's, without the beloved community of Thad's, without the beloved community of All Saints Beverly Hills, without the beloved community of Renovare. I could not and would not be the person standing in front of you today with the knowledge I have had I tried this by myself. It's through the stories that you have shared with me, through the laughter, through the absolute ruthless trust and vulnerability that people here have displayed, that all in those other places have displayed. That's why I love church. It's not the liturgy, although I love the liturgy. And it's not the Bible as much as I love the Bible. It's the beloved community that can only happen when all of you good people get together and start to mix it up. Good and bad. Dallas had another joke that I love, which is if you really want to learn how to love your enemy, you should go to church more. Because you're going to run into people who are not like you. But they're there anyway. And if there is ever a safe place to practice all of the things we have been talking about over the last 4 weeks, it's St. Patrick's. And I hope the inside of your home becomes the safe place to practice. This is hard work. This is deep soul refining work. It does not come easy to anybody. Your household should be a safe place to practice. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. You know what he didn't say? Love the world as yourself. He says that nowhere in the Bible. You want to know why? Because the word neighbor means the people closest to you. That begins in your household. And what is good for your house is good for your block. What is good for your block is good for your city. What is good for your city is good for the state. What is good for the state is good for the world. I'm not saying don't send aid to Ukraine. I'm saying don't send aid to Ukraine and ignore your wife's hurt feelings that are your responsibility. Get your priorities straight. If it's love your neighbor as yourself, that begins in your home. And once you got all that straight, you got your next door neighbor to work on. Some of us never make it to the next door neighbors because our household is a full plate, and that is enough. That can be a full-time job. But that should be a safe place. That is the beloved community. I hope that you go home and think about, how am I creating the beloved community in here? Because that's most of what I have been talking about. I know that St. Patrick's is a beloved community because I've been here now for 5 weeks running. And I know the gardener in charge. So I would encourage you, as your added tool, to continue to come here, to commit to this beloved community in all of its needs and in all of its good things, and to grow it and make it the place that feels safe for everybody to engage in this art of becoming. This is an encouraging community that supports and shares this vision of the with God life. So with that, I will finish next week on our 5th go-round together. We'll have a wide-ranging question and answer session moderated by George. So if there are things that I have said that have confused you, that come up, that you want to talk about, we will do that. We'll be prepared to, I'll take all your questions, whatever you want. And then we're doing some worship as well next week. So that should be super lively.